Thank you, Rohini, and really great to be with all of you. Thanks to your leadership, and thank you also so much to the sponsors that made this possible today. You know, when you first invited me to present today, I will acknowledge that I asked myself the question that you've already answered, which is why would you want a guy up here? And it dawned on me that this is our journey together. We can't do this without each other. And so I'm really grateful for this opportunity. We're learning together. We've learned together for many, many years. And I want to share some of my own journey as an illustration of what I hope we can do actively to support a crucial mission. Why is this such a crucial mission? It's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's that if any of us truly believes in hospitality, and that the meaning of hospitality is something that exists when the other person truly believes that you're on their side, well, that's kind of the definition of ally in and of itself. And for too long, it's been clear that either through ignorance or a lack of awareness or the thought that good intentions alone were enough, we have not satisfied or come close to satisfying the potential to be active allies. And I would say that my own personal journey illustrates this point. I was a first-time restaurateur at the age of 27 years old. And in the same way as I know that many first-time restaurateurs, whether they're men or women or whichever race, it was almost impossible for me to find any kind of outside funding. And so I know what that feels like. I haven't experienced that difficulty since 1994. And I know that many people on this Zoom call are still experiencing that difficulty today, but not just because you're a first-time restaurateur, but primarily because of your gender. And I'm aware of that, and I know that that's something that needs to change. In those early days of being a restaurateur, I was not incredibly conscious about the kinds of microaggressions and biases that I think I've learned a lot more about after all these years. I was proud that we would be a restaurant at Union Square Cafe, which, by the way, was the one and only restaurant I had for the first 10 years of my career, that would actually welcome women into the dining room, welcome women into our kitchen. And as crazy and as ignorant as that may sound, you have to understand that in 1985, our industry was dominated by restaurants that began with le, la, or il. They were the bastions of French chefs, French maitre d's, Italian chefs, Italian maitre d's. And in those kitchens, it was not only 100% male, but it was quite hostile, even male on male hostility. And there was no one in the dining room who was a woman because the excuse was that women cannot carry trays. And I knew that that's not the kind of restaurant I wanted to own. I did not want to own the kind of restaurant where the chef was an angry person running a kitchen based on fear. And we always had a pretty good cadre of women, both in our dining room and in our kitchen. And that said, I can also tell you that over many, many years, had we been keeping statistics as we now do, and as we now post on our Union Square Hospitality Group website, I would probably find that we had not done nearly a good enough job in terms of promoting women to top jobs in leadership. And I'm talking about as we grew our business over time. Our industry, and I would say some of this was really advanced through the advent of reality TV shows in food and some famous books that came out, glorified the macho kind of hostile environment that made it, unfortunately, this was kind of the next generation from the French hierarchy that you would find in the kitchen, where fear was the currency. and we seem to do our own American version of that throughout this country, where it was all too cool, unfortunately, to, brandish drugs and bad language and in some cases really awful behavior. And I'd say that the big learning that I have had along this journey over many, many years is that there are two extremes with nothing in the middle. You are either an active foe to advancement or you're an active ally, and that anything in between. And this was my own journey, which I believed was that my intentions were never anything other than what I believe were very positive intentions. But intentions are almost like being an ignorant foe. Good intentions on their own are like being an ignorant foe. And you're either an ally or you're an active foe. And so we have had, I think, a really incredible opportunity over many, many years. And I'm happy to say that we're making progress. I'm never satisfied. I'm not satisfied today, but I'll try to share some of the things that we have done. The first thing was to take a page out of a book I wrote called Setting the Table, that was what we call the 5 A's of mistake making. I think it's a mistake to say that you are about hospitality and not be on everybody's side, to only be on some people's side, and not understand that some people are disadvantaged to begin with. And so you have to go further if you want to be on their side. And so the 5 A's of mistake making, the first one is to be aware. And if you're not aware, you're nowhere. I have had experiences that have been painful learning experiences where I was not aware of things happening in my own businesses. And if I'm not aware, I'm nowhere. The second A is to acknowledge it and to acknowledge your role in it. And I've done that on many, many occasions. I hope that those occasions are fewer and fewer as we consistently act with training with our staffs, so that everybody goes through trainings on understanding what a microaggression is. Everybody understands that when we hire people, there is no disparity with compensation. Everybody understands that when we work with a supplier of any type, we are actively thinking about both gender and racial equity. And the third A, by the way, is apologizing. And once you're aware and you acknowledge, I think it's important to apologize. And that's something that's been part of our journey as well. Fourth A is acting. And I shared a couple of the things that we are working on and have been working on for several years to act. And the fifth A, which I think is incredibly important for any kind of mistake, and I would say especially a mistake that may be a vestige of our industry historically, but if we are leaders, it's our issue to address, is to apply additional generosity. And so when you find that you have ground that you need to make up, you better really make up that ground in a big, big way. I'm going to just end with a couple quick thoughts because I know that people are excited to hear from Andrew right now. But along our journey, we have really believed that it's what's most crucial is to give people a voice that is heard, that is respected, that is not interrupted, and that people have a seat at our table. And so we started with our board, and our board of directors at Union Square Hospitality Group has women on it. It was a mistake to only have one woman on our board, because I think to ask anyone to be the voice for everybody is unworkable and unfair. So we have women on our board. We have an investment fund, which we call Enlightened Hospitality Investment. And 6 of our investments are companies that have been founded or co-founded by women. And that's what we call putting our money where our hearts are. It is a journey, and journeys can be long, but as long as we're pointed in the right direction and aware of our role as leaders, and humble enough to acknowledge that not only do we not have all the answers, but that it's our responsibility, if we are going to be active allies, to each day listen, learn, and act. Thank you.
Danny, thank you so much. You actually cut me off before I was about to blow your trumpet for you. So for those of you who are from our industry, you know Danny Meyer very well. I mean, his portfolio of Union Square Hospitality Group restaurants is iconic. In fact, it is his tabla and modern that drew me to the world of restaurants and made me forsake the world of McKinsey. So Danny owes me an apology for that. But this, apart from that, author, setting the table, as well as founding Shake Shack, incredible change, which is now close to 500 locations, half of them global. IPO'd that, chairman of the board. I mean, it is, if that is not revolutionizing change, it's incredible. So thank you, Danny, for sharing your thoughts on us. Can't wait to dig deep after we hear from Andrew, and I'd love to invite Andrew up with us. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can indeed. And so I want to thank you, Andrew, for joining our conversation today. We celebrate the fearless men who are part of our discussion. And you have been amazing. I've reached out to you thrice for panels, and you've never said no. So either, as I mentioned, I owe you royalties, or you owe me a PR fund, one of the two. But
I think, well, thank you, Rohini. I really appreciate it. And I'm thrilled to be here today. Like Danny, I had the same reaction. I was like, what, why, why me? But I will tell you that, you know, as Danny said, you know, you're either for this or you're against it. There's no sitting in the middle. And the reason why I do a lot of the things that I do is that I don't believe it's okay to sit on the sidelines, regardless of what the issue is that you believe strongly about. I want to make the world a better place, and I think it's an ignorant and failing viewpoint to think that gender equality is something that we can just ignore and let, as you said, that glacial evolution take place. You know, I'm 60 years old. I was born into a rigged system. I'm the son of a well-to-do white couple growing up in a home of privilege in New York City. I had a very strange introduction to this business. I entered the profession as a teenager, working for two women that owned a restaurant in East Hampton, Long Island, called The Quiet Clam. And there were women in the kitchen, and there were women working, you know, in the dining room. And my mother was an early activist in New York City in the 60s and 70s. So I had a lot of opportunity to have good role modeling in front of me. Two of the women that I worked with, and for, I should say, early in my career, before my own alcoholism and addiction took me away from the industry I loved for a couple of years, were the late Leslie Revson and Ann Rosenzweig. And they educated me on what it was like to be an ally to anyone who's been marginalized, pushed down, and underserved, or living in a caste system of any kind, both here in America and beyond. What I was struck by when I left kitchens owned and operated by women was how different and how unempathetic, how dysfunctional, how angry they actually were. Going off to Europe after working in Leslie's kitchen and Ann's kitchen, coming back to America and working in the restaurants of New York City in the late 80s, it was sort of astounding to me. And they simply weren't as effective. So very early on, I saw with my own eyes that a restaurant where everybody, regardless of their gender, their color of their skin, their belief system of any kind, if there was mutual respect for those people, they were much more functional. One of the things, Rohini, that you asked me to think about for this was for women in our industry, virtually all, as you put the mega groups, are male owned. So what do I see as the problem? And I actually thought that was the problem. It's not just male ownership, it's the male domination in so many of those countries. Danny referenced the difference between having one woman on the board versus having several. And I think that's really the biggest issue. Yes, we have over the last 10 years seen leaders. I was just at an event in North Carolina, so Ashley Christensen's group down there comes to mind, of women-owned and operated restaurant groups in particular, that are approaching all of their business modeling internally and public-facing to be a more productive, and their entire team practically is women-led. And we're going to have more formidable. I'm sitting outside an airport, as if you couldn't tell. I'm going to let that plane sort of cruise by for a second. Obviously, we're going to see more formidable companies grow. And we're going to therefore be able to increase the number of typical activities that have been talked about before, like mentorship and investment. But I think the real focus, and for me, with other issues I tackle, out in the advocacy world, it really comes down to making change where the money is and making change on Capitol Hill as well. Because you use the term glacial. I've studied social justice movements over the last 60 years. It took 35 years between the time we realized that seatbelts saved lives before it became a law. It took 28 years after we realized that cigarettes were not good for you before we even got a warning label on a box, right? And then very quickly after that, the inability for those companies to advertise on TV. So these glacial social justice movement is part of the issue. And I think the way to circumvent that is not to wait for the culture to shift, right? Slowly over time. We have to accelerate change. And the fastest ways to do that are by changing laws. That means at the municipal and state level as well, not just on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. I'm going to wait for this plane to go over. My apologies. But the vital area where I think that we can do the most benefit with those laws is by increasing access to money. That's everything from the form of tax rebates to favorable loans from banks, anything that we can do to accelerate that. When you reminded me that the ERA has still not been ratified, I felt something roll over in my stomach. What kind of country are we that would not do that? So, what can the men of our industry do in terms of near actions to be meaningful allies? It's to devote our resources and influence and to stand side by side, because this has got to be a we thing. It has to be a we thing. I was reminded last night, by my better half, that putting responsibility solely on the shoulders of women in this industry is ludicrous, and it's insulting. Men have a responsibility to stand up and say, hey, in my case, I'm 60. I know my very existence has been part of the problem. So what is it that I do the same things that Danny is doing? We've adopted handbooks in all of our companies. We've accelerated leadership within our companies for women. My main business, FoodWorks, which oversees my My other two businesses is solely populated by women. I'm the only male in our group. So we have to unrig the system. And by the way, I did not do that on purpose, but I did, in fact, make sure that we had seats for everybody at our tables. So we need to forget about changing the system, which takes too long, that glacial social justice movement system, and instead start to share the playbook from other industries that have been successful. And that's lobbying Washington, that's changing laws, that's increasing access to money, and it is pushing for that together. As a founding member of the IRC, one of the things that I was proudest of when we rolled out our opinion piece and exercised influence on the RRF, which was the SBA program that sadly only got $29 billion instead of the $70 billion that was applied for to help restaurants, was to proactively put women-owned businesses and businesses owned by people of color and businesses smaller than those doing, I think it was $1 million a year in total revenue, at the front of the line, not just letting everyone get in line together. And I think it's that kind of activity that is so vital for us to be aware of and to work hard for. Danny, interestingly enough, I'm not surprised. I've adopted a lot of his playbook for life in my, how I go about my day-to-day business, personally and professionally. And he's been a tremendous friend and mentor to me. But I learned last night in talking to some people that the real change, if you look at some companies, big companies that are doing the right thing, is about leadership and setting the tone. We have it's the largest electronics retailer in the world. I'm assuming they're probably Fortune 100 US company named Best Buy, which is headquartered in Minneapolis. And it actually made it actual policy that women were going to be 50% of the board and C-suite. They adopted a say-do mandatory policy that they were going to do what they say and have timelines and deadlines for them. And it's talked about internally all the time. And they set out to proactively hire more women into those roles. And that creates an incredible opportunity for everyone. Male-dominated, male-owned restaurants and food companies over the last several generations created systemic inequities, dangerous environments, brittle internal economies, and so on. Were some of them enlightened and successful? Sure, of course they were. I'm talking about the vast majority, though, were not. And we need to get those businesses to commit to level the gender playing field right now. And I guarantee you, if we can figure out ways to do that, internal campaigns, external campaigns, changing laws, municipal and statewide, and at the federal level, those systems within restaurants will change for the better. And I think the last thing that I would say about laws is a great quote that I read from my friend Elizabeth Strader. I've spent a lot of time with the United Farm Workers, telling their stories for different TV shows that I've been engaged with, in a series of documentaries called What's Eating America on MSNBC. And I met Elizabeth. She is the United Farm Workers Director of Strategic Campaigns. And she says that the tipping point has not reached farms, and I extend that to restaurants and food businesses as well. And she has said that the arsenal on the side of the employer has gotten bigger, and we are still working with archaic laws. And I believe that is the case. And we need to have change at the municipal, state, and federal level. And that's where I think a lot of our focus needs to be. And I thank you, everyone, for allowing me to share some time with you today.
Andrew, thank you so much. You too cut off the brilliant introduction I had for you. So let me do it now that you've spoken. But everybody knows you for bizarre foods, and who's to define what's bizarre is my opinion. But hey, that, and I admire your intellectual heft for what's eating America. You're one of the few restaurateurs who goes beyond our world to explore immigration, to explore humanitarian, farm workers. UN World Food Program, you're an ambassador, you're an advocate. There's so much you do that your resume is outright exhausting. But we are thrilled to have you. And I'd love to invite Danny on screen as well. Danny, that was incredibly thoughtful. I couldn't agree more about you are either an active for or you are an active ally. Being a bystander doesn't cut it. So totally get it that a big part of the ball is in the policy court, but you are here as icons and men in our industry. How can you help us make change not glacial, but clipped and rapid? Can we not? I mean, I will throw out two ideas, but I'm putting you on the spot here. How can you galvanize our industry? We don't want more manuals. We don't want guidelines and webinars. We don't want tinkering around with $5,000, $10,000 grants. They're pitiful and insulting. Maybe it might make a dent, but not really. How can we, can we not, if 10 of you mega restaurateurs were to get together, could we not go to a Jeff Bezos and get a fund for 100 million or a 200? I mean, I'm just throwing stuff out. What can we do? Have I effectively silenced you?
Do you want to call on either of us? Because I don't think either of us wants to, men can mansplain to each other too. We don't want to do that. I'll try to share a couple thoughts. I think we need to be the change we want to see. I'm not saying that a few $100 million couldn't be put to good use, but maybe because I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, which is the show me state, I'd much rather do it than talk about it. But on the other hand, as a leader, and Andrew does this better than anybody, if you have the platform, you actually need to talk about it a little bit more. Look, we have, in terms of being the change we want to see, I spoke about our board of directors. We have 8 C-level positions at Union Square Hospitality Group. Of those 8 positions, 2 of them are white men, 6 of them are women. And I will tell you that we are a better company because of that. Being the change we want to see means promoting actively and championing people's careers. And sometimes what that means is again, acknowledging and being aware and understanding that the thing that I was taught when I first got into business, which is, as a leader, as a manager, you need to have an open door policy. That is nonsense. That's the most passive aggressive thing any leader can do. We actually have to leave our open door in our own office and go out and understand what needs to be said, but is not being said because people are either afraid that they don't have a platform to say it or express it. So we have to create more opportunities for people to express themselves and then champion people and advocate and mentor actively people who have not had those chances historically. And then the only other thing I want to add right now is that when it comes to public policy, I don't have any question that when you talk about this country and how far behind we are in so many different ways, childcare and having active childcare is the single number one, like with everything else, 50 yards behind it, reason that when you look at whether you call it the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle or the Great, whatever you want to call this thing, where we've had a hole in our pocket for longer than just the 2 years of COVID, where we've lost all kinds of people. And then we have failed to fill the funnel with enough amazingly talented people. The proportion of women who have elected to leave this industry is embarrassingly larger by a lot than men. And I have no question that the absence of childcare is a paid childcare. Why in the world would I pay to commute to be away from my family when I can barely make enough money to pay for the person who's looking after my kids? Why would I do that? I would just not make that choice. And so guess what? Not a big surprise where we are right now.
Danny, I couldn't agree more. All of the policy issues you raised are amazing. We're almost out of time, but I'd love to hear some words from you, Andrew. And to be continued, we'll have Let's Talk Change Part 2, but to be continued. Andrew, anything on you on out of the box things we can do within our industry that the male reciters can use their influence, resources, and heft on?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily out of the box, but I would extend out from what Danny said. We have to remember that the number one employer in the country of single mothers is the hospitality industry and restaurants in particular. The same with first-time job seekers, last-time job seekers, new Americans, those leaving jails and institutions. It's a very, very special group. So to advocate at the state and federal level for mandatory childcare, for paid sick leave, for a higher minimum wage, I could go on and on and on. Those are the places where real big change is going to happen. Rohini, I know that the idea of somebody writing a really big check certainly could help. But I think from a long-term beneficial effect, it would be far greater to enact a group, a set of workers' rights laws in this country that actually allowed for people to return to the industry they love. People aren't leaving restaurants because they don't like the act of hospitality. They're leaving the industry because they can't afford to stay there.
Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on. And I will now hand over to my colleagues for the next component of our program. Thank you again, Andrew, Danny, and we celebrate you for joining us and being allies.